Dust clouds swirl around his boots as Ezekiel Zeke Holloway stands over a frail, silent child at a desert well, his heart pounding from guilt, uncertainty, and a trembling hope. The boy's faint whisper, "He made me run," echoes in Zeke's chest like a long-lost memory. As those footprints vanish at the horizon, Zeke realizes his past has found him, with consequences he can't yet understand. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Palm-dry earth cracks beneath Zeke's weathered boots as he trudges toward the water well at dawn. The only sound is the faint whistle of the railway in the distance, the iron snake that gave birth to Dry Hollow. That same town, once booming, now tainted by profiteers and fading promises. Zeke's fingers brush the worn leather cover of his brother's wartime diary in his satchel, and he clutches the Bible with trembling reverence, feeling again the weight of a promise he failed to uphold. He pauses beside the well, watching dust rise with the sun. A soft, ragged cry halts him mid-breath. There, curled beneath a scrubby mesquite, lies a boy, gaunt, dusty, lips quivering with tears no longer held. The child looks up at Zeke with hollow eyes, barely uttering, "He made me run." Before they came back, his voice cracks, and he collapses. Zeke's hands close over the boy's shoulders, steadying him, urgency searing through his chest. Zeke hauls the child upright and hoists him toward his back. Every memory of past mistakes, a life lived by the gun, a boy killed by his own bullet blaring in his ears. He glances back, footprints trace through the sand, some fading toward dryness, others looping back toward them. His heart tightens. Someone is watching, waiting. He carries the boy through the shifting dunes, past the serpentine tracks of the railway that echoes with manifest destiny and broken treaties. He swears silently, promising this time he won't fail. He reaches his ramshackle cabin, wood bleached by sun, a relic of a life left behind. Inside, the silence is thick with dust and regret. The boy, barely conscious, stirs when Zeke pulls out the Bible from his coat pocket. At the sight of the book, the child's hand twitches. Zeke kneels beside him, breath shallow with fear and something like hope. "Do you know this?" he asks softly. The boy's heavy lids flicker open. "My mama used to read this, until they burned it," he whispers, voice full of grief. Zeke's chest aches as memories flood, of Sofia Delgado, of compassion cut short, of a world where the hymn he once heard in church was replaced by the unending thrum of railroad hammers. So softly he asks, "Who are you?" And the boy, voice weak, murmurs, "Tomas." Zeke wraps him in a threadbare blanket and sits beside him, the hush of the desert pressing against the walls. He watches Tomas's chest rise and fall, thinking that maybe, just maybe, fate has given him a chance to rewrite what he once ruined. Outside, the wind carries faint echoes of train whistles and the promise of something greater, or something darker, yet to come. Tomas coughs, and the fire Zeke builds sputters, illuminating the boy's face with flickering hope. Zeke places the Bible gently on the table, hands trembling. He leans closer. "We'll find your mama's memory," he vows, voice low. Tomas's eyes close again, and Zeke whispers, "And I'll keep you from being hunted." Zeke stands in the doorframe, silhouetted by early morning light. His heart pounds with fear and resolve, knowing that the next step will plunge him deeper into the shadows of his past. As the wind rattles the window and the rails in the distance groan with unstoppable progress, Zeke realizes that protecting Tomas may cost him everything. By sunrise, the boy had begun to stir, lips still cracked, face tight with pain, but his eyes steadier now. Zeke knelt beside him with a bowl of cooled bean mash and half a canteen of water. Tomas drank slowly, as if every drop came with a memory too bitter to swallow all at once. "What's your last name?" Zeke asked. Tomas hesitated, eyes on the flickering flame in the hearth. Then, with a careful breath, "Delgado." Zeke nodded slowly, the name tightening something old and frayed inside his chest. Years ago, back when he still hunted men for coin, there had been a Sofia Delgado, clever, soft-spoken, with a fire behind her eyes that didn't belong in the dusty shanty towns near the border. Zeke remembered the night he let her escape, though he never admitted it to the marshal who'd sent him after her. And now here sat her boy. Tomas reached into his shirt and pulled out a chain. At its end swung a silver medallion, dulled by sweat and time. Etched across its face in delicate script were the letters, S. Delgado. "I kept it," he said, voice low, "so I wouldn't forget her." Zeke reached out and turned the medal over. On the back, barely visible, a crescent moon and a cluster of tiny carved crosses, familiar symbols carved into old Catholic shrines and sometimes left as blessings over graves. "Your mama, what happened to her?" Tomas didn't answer. He just looked at the floor, eyes gone hollow again. She told me to run when the men came. I didn't look back. Zeke's jaw clenched. The desert around Dry Hollow had become a hunting ground, one with rules written not by God or conscience, but by men chasing land, silver, and railroad contracts. "We're going to the mission," he said. "They might know more about her, about who's after you." Tomas didn't respond, but when Zeke stood and offered his hand, the boy took it without question. By midday, they were riding west on Zeke's mule cart, the wind dry and bitter, kicking dust into their clothes and skin. The mission sat beyond the hills, a crumbling adobe church with cracked bell towers and sun-bleached saints standing guard. A few sisters tended to a garden. The bells didn't ring anymore. Progress had quieted them. A priest, ancient and wiry, greeted them at the door. "Father Reyes," he introduced himself, eyeing Tomas with sharp curiosity. "We're looking for someone," Zeke said. "A woman named Sofia Delgado. She may have passed through here months back." The priest frowned, took a long breath. Then, without a word, he motioned for them to follow him inside. He led them to a storage room behind the chapel. There, among bundles of paper and half-burned candles, he opened a drawer. From within, he drew a folded, yellowed envelope. "We tried to send this, but we never found the man it was addressed to." He handed it to Zeke. The name on the front was written in soft, slanted letters, Ezekiel Holloway. Zeke held the envelope as if it might burn him. Inside was a single letter, written in Spanish. He could barely read it, but a few words leapt out. "Perdóname, nuestro hijo se confía en él." "She was here," Father Reyes said gently. "She left Tomas hidden in the canyon when they came. The men were looking for land titles, or for something else. They didn't ask. They just took." Zeke felt the old rage stir in his chest. He had seen what happened when law and railroad money walked hand in hand. He had been their tool once. He looked to Tomas. The boy was staring at a tattered Bible on the chapel shelf, its spine cracked just like the one Zeke carried. He reached for it, fingers brushing the cover reverently. "My mama read to me from this," he whispered, until they burned it in front of her. Zeke placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, steady and firm. "You said you didn't look back," he murmured, "but now we do." The wind howled outside the chapel walls. Dry Hollow had changed since the last time Zeke rode its dusty path. What once was a miner's stopover had become a pocket empire of timber, rail, and raw ambition. Rows of clapboard houses leaned under the weight of smoke and sweat. Children played beside barrels of slag, while men in dark suits and shiny boots paced like they owned the dirt beneath them. Zeke kept Tomas close as they passed the saloon. The boy's dark skin and Mexican features drew stares, some curious, others hateful. Zeke felt it too. He didn't wear the duster anymore, but his name still walked ahead of him in whispers. Cazador de Osage Creek, the man who hunted men without blinking. Some called him Justice, others something far darker. They stopped at a small shop once owned by the Flores family, launderers and quiet folk. The window was boarded, paint peeling from the door. A neighbor, apron dusted with flour, looked up as Zeke approached. "Flores left," she said flatly, "after the Delgado girl was killed." Zeke removed his hat. "Sofia," the woman nodded, tightening her arms around herself, "said it was a robbery, but no one really believes that. Not with how fast the sheriff closed it up. And not after she refused to sell her land." Zeke felt the heat rise in his chest again. "She had a son," he said. "Do you know if anyone—" The woman glanced at Tomas and went silent. Then she looked past Zeke, toward the saloon. "They're watching you already. Be careful what questions you ask, especially about that boy." Inside the saloon it felt like old times, smoke, sweat, spilled whiskey. Piano out of tune, cards slapped onto tables like declarations of war. Zeke approached the bar. Behind it stood a man who hadn't aged well, Jeb Crane, his former trail partner. One of the few men Zeke had trusted. Once. "Well, I'll be," Jeb muttered, setting down a glass. "Didn't think I'd see you again." "I'm not here for old times." "Figured. That your boy?" Zeke didn't answer. "I've heard things," Jeb said. "Railroad's buying every inch of land west of the gully, and every name that's too brown or too Catholic is disappearing. Ain't a town anymore, Zeke. It's a clean slate. For sale." Zeke's voice dropped. "Who was after Sofia?" Jeb didn't look up. "Men from the company. Said she had papers for land with silver in it. Her daddy's. She wouldn't sell. Then one night, house burned. Sheriff said it was thieves, but I saw the boots, rail company standard. Same as what I used to wear." Zeke's grip tightened on the glass in his hand. "What about the boy?" Jeb asked. "They don't know he's hers." "Not yet." "Then don't let them find out." Zeke turned to leave, heart pounding, when a well-dressed man approached, gold chain over his vest, thick mustache, manicured hands. "Ezekiel Holloway," the man said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Didn't think you were still breathing." Zeke didn't respond. We're offering good money these days, especially for children without papers. Found alone, no guardians. You know how it is. This land's lawless. Best they grow up with folks who'll teach them something useful. The man's smile widened. That one, he nodded at Tomas, could fetch a fine price. Zeke stared at him, unblinking. I see you're not the talking kind. That's fine. But think about it. Better for everyone. Tomas looked up at Zeke, confused. Without a word, Zeke placed his hand on the boy's shoulder and steered him toward the door. Outside, the sun had dipped just enough to cast long shadows. Zeke's own stretched far behind him, longer it seemed than ever before. The mission priest had drawn them a crude map, ink on old parchment, frayed at the edges. They buried her here, he'd said, finger trembling over a hollow east of town. No marker, no name, just wind and silence. Zeke rode the old mule cart with Tomas beside him. The boy hadn't spoken since Dry Hollow. His silence weighed more than words. Zeke understood. Silence was armor. He had worn it too after the war, after the hunts, after every mistake. They reached the hill by late afternoon. The canyon was quiet, carved by time and grief. The wind carried the dry scent of sagebrush and the far-off creak of vultures overhead. She's here? Tomas asked. Zeke nodded. I believe so. They walked down the slope, boots crunching on brittle ground. A crude wooden cross leaned, half swallowed by sand. Beneath it, a mound, barely more than a rise in the earth. Something glinted near its base. Tomas rushed forward and dropped to his knees. He pulled out a small, sun-bleached doll, hand-stitched, missing an eye. His fingers trembled as he clutched it. This was hers, he whispered. Zeke said nothing. Instead, he knelt beside him and reached into the earth, hands dry and cracked, digging slowly. The soil was stubborn, resistant, like the land itself didn't want to remember. Just beneath the surface, something hard caught his palm. A spent bullet casing, bent, blackened. On its side, a barely legible engraving, USM, United States Militia. Zeke turned it over in his hand. His chest tightened, memories erupting like fire behind his ribs. He knew those bullets, knew the men who carried them. Years ago, he'd hunted Apaches with them in New Mexico. Justified it then. Orders, money, survival. But Sophia hadn't been Apache. She'd been a washerwoman, a mother. Zeke stood slowly, dirt still on his hands. He looked out over the dry plains, past the train tracks in the distance. The wind shifted. She died because of men like me, he murmured. Tomas looked up. Did you know her? Zeke hesitated. I did, he said finally. Not like I should have. Not like your father did. Tomas's brow furrowed. My father's dead. Zeke nodded. Yes, but he tried to protect you. Tomas looked down, pressing the doll against his chest. The wind picked up, blowing dust in hard bursts. When Zeke turned again, Tomas was gone. Tomas! He shouted. The wind swallowed his voice. He scanned the ridge. No movement. Then hoofbeats, echoes in the rock, quick, close. Zeke reached for the rifle hidden under the cart, eyes wide, heart pounding. He sprinted up the slope, boots slipping. The sound of riders came clearer now. 3, maybe 4 horses. He reached the top just in time to see shadows vanishing between outcrops. A scrap of red cloth fluttered in the brush, a piece torn from Tomas's sleeve. He snatched it and turned to the horizon. There were no footprints this time, only dust. The sun was sinking, and with it the last sense of stillness. Zeke's legs ached from running. His breath came in sharp bursts, but his grip on the rifle never loosened. He moved like a predator now. Every sound dissected, every gust of wind interrogated. The scrap of red cloth clenched in his fist whispered a truth he didn't want to admit. Someone had taken Tomas. Tracks were faint but visible. 4 horses, heavy, deliberate, heading into the Badlands where stone outcroppings twisted like broken bones, and the wind screamed through the canyons. No sane man would follow them at dusk. Zeke followed anyway. He knew these paths, knew them too well. Years ago, this was where he waited in ambush, where he hunted men with bounties on their heads and eyes full of terror. Now the roles had reversed. He was no longer the hunter. He was a man chasing the ghost of a promise, chasing blood he didn't know he carried until now. As twilight thickened, he found the entrance to an old silver shaft, abandoned since the vein dried up, the kind of place where screams died quickly and mercy forgot its name. He moved slow, rifle raised, shoulders tense. Inside, shadows clung to the walls like memories. Water dripped from above. The scent of iron, damp wood and mildew filled the narrow tunnel. A sudden rustle. Zeke froze. From deeper within, a child's voice, a soft hum, faint, rhythmic, a lullaby. He moved toward it, each step measured, until the tunnel widened into a collapsed chamber, lit only by a sliver of dying light through a break in the stone. Tomas sat alone on the floor, his knees pulled to his chest, humming to the doll in his hands. Zeke knelt slowly. "Tomas!" The boy turned sharply, his eyes wide with fear, then softened with recognition. "I didn't run," he said. "They chased me, but then they stopped." Zeke frowned. "Stopped?" Tomas pointed to the rocks. "One of their horses slipped. They left angry. Said you'd come looking and that you always come too late." Zeke felt that like a knife between his ribs. He crouched down and pressed his hand to the boy's shoulder. "You're safe now." "No," Tomas said. "They said they'd be back, said I was worth something." Zeke's hand tightened. He knew what that meant. The orphans being shipped east by the railroad's social contractors weren't being given homes. They were being scrubbed of their names, their history, their blood, turned into useful shadows of themselves. And Tomas was proof of something, proof of a crime, maybe more than one. That night, Zeke built a fire just outside the mine, using branches from half-dead shrubs. The flames danced in the dark, throwing jagged shadows on the rocks. Tomas sat beside him, wrapped in Zeke's old blanket. They ate jerky and dried beans. Silence lingered between bites. "Did you know my father?" the boy asked quietly. Zeke stared into the fire. "I knew a man who fought harder than most, who believed in what the war was supposed to mean. But I left him behind. I left him with a promise I never kept." Tomas said nothing. Zeke reached into his satchel and pulled out the diary, leather-bound, stained, barely held together by threads. He handed it to the boy. "Your father wrote this," Zeke said. "Every word from the trenches to the end, and some were meant for me." Tomas opened it gently, his fingers trembling as they passed across the old pages. "You never read them?" "I was afraid," Zeke said, "afraid of what they'd ask me to do." The boy stopped on a page near the back. The handwriting was shakier, the ink blotted. He read aloud. "If Sophia ever makes it north, tell her I kept my word until the end. If not, Zeke, if you ever read this, she'll need you. The boy will need you. Don't let my silence be the end of our name." Tomas looked up. "Is that why you came for me?" Zeke's throat tightened. "No," he said softly. "I didn't come for you. You found me, and I think God made it that way." The boy watched the fire, silent again. Then he began to hum, the same tune from earlier, soft, sorrowful, but steady. Zeke closed his eyes. He knew that melody. It wasn't just a lullaby. It was the same hymn their mother used to hum when they were children, before the raids, before the chains. He hadn't heard it in 40 years. How could Sophia have known it? He opened his eyes and stared at Tomas. "What did your mama sing to you?" he asked. Tomas looked down, a little nervous, then recited the words, half Spanish, half English, and unmistakably familiar. Zeke swallowed hard. He pulled the diary from Tomas's lap and flipped to the final page. One sentence stared back at him. "She sings the same hymn our mama used to. I never told her. She just knew." Zeke's hands began to tremble, not from fear, from revelation. Somewhere along the line, beneath the war, the bounty hunts, the silence, he had missed the truth. Sophia hadn't just been a woman his brother loved. She had been more than that. Family, in ways he had refused to accept. Blood had been reaching for him all along, and now it needed him to choose, not with a bullet, but with sacrifice. Dawn rose slow and red across the canyon, like the land itself was bleeding. Zeke and Tomas walked in silence, the mine behind them, the fire's last ashes drifting into the morning wind. Zeke's thoughts moved heavy, like iron in his chest. That hymn, that voice, that diary entry, it haunted him. They reached the mule cart by mid-morning. Zeke lifted Tomas into the seat, then paused, his eyes on the jagged hills behind them. Someone had left that message for him back at the canyon. "You always come too late." He couldn't let that truth keep echoing. He needed answers, and there was only one place left to find them: Santa Fe. The federal postal station stood at the edge of the city, tucked beside the train depot, surrounded by freight wagons and men barking orders through the din of steam and hammering steel. Santa Fe was alive with movement, with progress, with power that didn't ask permission. But Zeke didn't flinch. He walked through the front doors like a man who still wore a badge, like the ghosts behind him were watching to see what he'd do now. At the counter stood a thin clerk with a faded tie and ink-stained fingers. "I'm looking for something," Zeke said. "Sent under my name, but never claimed." "Name?" "Ezekiel Holloway." The man disappeared into the back. It took minutes, long and anxious. Tomas stood near the door, eyes flicking between the brass mailboxes and the train whistles beyond the window. Then the clerk returned, with a box, dust-covered, untouched. Zeke reached for it with both hands. Inside, a bundle of folded letters, a half-torn photograph, and a birth certificate. He held the papers as if they were sacred. His brother's writing stared back at him, shaky but clear. Sophia and I married by lantern light near El Paso. Never told anyone. Thought it safer that way. I didn't make it home, Zeke, but my son will, even if I'm not there to take him. Zeke's eyes burned. He looked at the certificate next. Name, Tomas Rafael Delgado Holloway. Date of birth, June 14, 1876. Father, Jacob Holloway. Mother, Sophia Delgado. There was no room for doubt anymore. Tomas wasn't just a boy in need. He was Zeke's family, blood of his blood. And the men who took Sophia, they hadn't just robbed a stranger. They had buried a part of Zeke's past with her. As he stood there, fists clenched around paper, something outside the post office caught his eye. A freshly printed wanted poster nailed to a wooden beam. His name, his face. Wanted, Ezekiel Holloway, for abduction of a minor, known to be armed and dangerous. The air left his lungs. Tomas stood just feet away, unaware. Zeke turned and walked briskly back to the cart. "We ride now," he said. "But now." They took the back alleys out of Santa Fe, then veered off the road entirely, cutting through arroyos and dried-up creek beds. The sound of the train thundered behind them, growing louder. That train wasn't just carrying ore and lumber, it was carrying power, the kind that could erase names, erase bloodlines, erase truth. That evening, they reached a rise overlooking a wide valley. Zeke dismounted, pulled the cart into a brush-covered depression and started a small fire, just enough to warm a pan of beans. Tomas was quiet again, but not afraid. He had grown in silence. He sat closer now, eyes steadier. After dinner, Zeke handed him one of the letters. "It's from your father," he said. "How you should read it." Tomas read slowly, voice soft but sure. "You're the reason I kept going, not the war, not the cause, just the hope of seeing your face. And if I don't make it, I pray Zeke will find you. He's made of stone, my brother. But he's true. If he reads this, it means he finally came home." Tomas looked up. "Why didn't you come before?" Zeke's breath caught. "I thought I had nothing left to give." The boy tilted his head. "And now?" Zeke looked toward the darkening horizon, where the rails glinted like a blade in moonlight. "Now I've got something to lose." Silence fell again, but this time it felt different, more like peace, then rustling. Zeke stood, rifle ready. From the ridge behind them, a rider approached slowly, alone. As the figure came closer, moonlight revealed a familiar face, weathered, stern, with a streak of white through dark hair. Clara White Elk. Zeke lowered the rifle. She dismounted with quiet grace, looking from him to Tomas. "You're harder to find than the wind," she said dryly. "I try," Zeke answered. Clara's gaze turned serious. "You're wanted in every town within 100 miles. They say you kidnapped a child, that you're a fugitive again." "I didn't kidnap him." "I know." She paused, then handed him a folded paper, another poster, but this one older. It showed a much younger Sophia Delgado. "Did you know," Clara said, "that before she died, Sophia came looking for you?" Zeke stared at the poster. "No. She said you'd come one day. She just didn't think she'd still be alive to see it." Zeke sat down, suddenly exhausted. Clara looked at him, her voice lower now. "You need sanctuary, and there's only one place left to offer it." Zeke nodded. "The reservation lands. Clara's people, far from the reach of the railroad, but not far from the past." He looked at Tomas, then at Clara. "Take us there." The land Clara White Elk called home stretched beyond the hills like a wounded hymn, wide, dry, and proud. The reservation sat where the tracks of the Iron Horse hadn't yet reached, though Zeke knew it was only a matter of time. He had ridden through these lands years ago as a hired scout, pretending neutrality, while men like him mapped out what would later be stolen. Now, with Tomas beside him and Clara leading the way, he returned not as an observer, but as a man seeking shelter from the fire he helped light. They passed elders who stood in silence, their eyes measuring the stranger among them. Some recognized Zeke from another lifetime, when he rode with soldiers and bounty papers. Others simply saw a man aged by regret, bringing with him a boy too quiet for his age. Clara spoke little as they entered the heart of the camp, but her presence was enough to grant them passage. Zeke understood that hospitality here was not charity. It was a kind of sacred risk. He and Tomas were given space in a canvas tent reinforced with pine poles, the floor covered in woven blankets and the scent of sage. That night, Clara brought food, corn mash, rabbit stew, and silence. She watched Zeke eat in thoughtful bites, her eyes betraying both memory and curiosity. Tomas sat beside him, no longer clinging, but no longer distant either. After the meal, Clara motioned for Zeke to follow her to the fire circle, where a few elders gathered under stars that seemed closer here. One man, tall and lean with skin the color of old bark, offered Zeke a carved pipe and a long look. "You came here before," the elder said in Lakota-accented English, "with a map and a price on men's heads." Zeke nodded slowly, lowering his eyes. "I did. You come now with neither. I come with a name I failed to carry." There was a pause. Then the elder passed him the pipe. "We remember those who return to mend." Later that night, Zeke sat outside the tent, the air cool against his face, the stars like quiet witnesses overhead. Tomas lay inside, finally asleep, the boy's small body curled around his father's old diary. Zeke held Sophia's letter in his lap, reading the same lines over and over, trying to hear her voice behind the ink. "If you find him, don't let him forget who he is. Not by name, not by color, not by blood." Clara joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. She didn't speak at first. She never filled silence unless silence asked to be broken. "You believe in forgiveness now?" she asked eventually. Zeke considered it. "I don't know if I deserve it," he said, "but I believe in paying what's owed." "You think the boy owes you something?" "No," Zeke said quietly. "I think I owe him everything." Clara nodded. "He's not the only one with enemies." Zeke looked up. "They sent a rider," she said. "Came yesterday. Said a man named Holloway is hiding a half-Mexican boy. Said the senator wants him back." Zeke's breath left his chest. "They're coming." Clara nodded again, her voice still calm. Soon, Zeke's first instinct was to run, to take Tomas, vanish into the mesas, leave the fight behind. But that instinct died as quickly as it came. He had run before, when his brother needed him, when Sophia could have been saved. Now, with the child of both in his care, he would not run again. He looked at Clara. "I'll stay," he said, "and if they come, you won't be alone." Zeke returned to the tent and lay beside Tomas, who stirred and rolled toward him in his sleep. For the first time in years, Zeke felt something more than guilt. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was its distant cousin. A flicker of meaning. But just before sleep came, a voice returned to him, an echo from Dry Hollow. The well-dressed man, with a smile as false as his offer, he could fetch a fine price. Zeke opened his eyes. They wouldn't just come with papers, they would come with fire. The days that followed were dry and clear, but the sky always seemed to be watching. Each sunrise cast long shadows behind Zeke as he helped Clara's people reinforce their dwellings with brush and stone. He took to small tasks easily, silently, hauling water, mending roofs, collecting firewood, but his mind was never far from the boy asleep beside him each night, nor from the threat inching ever closer through desert and decree. Clara observed him in the way old warriors observe wounded animals, watching for signs of healing or collapse. It was she who brought the news. A gathering would take place in Dry Hollow in 6 days. A political event, cloaked in celebration. The senator himself would speak at the opening of the new rail station. There would be press, federal eyes, and witnesses. "He'll be surrounded," she said, spreading the map across the table inside the small council tent, "and he'll be speaking with clean hands, dressed like justice. But if he's exposed there, the whole machine behind him cracks." Zeke stared at the inked outlines. The old town square, the rail platform, the boarding house that used to belong to the Flores family. Sophia had walked those streets, had likely died not far from them. "You have the letters," Clara said, "the records, his signature on relocation documents, and the birth certificate. You show those in public, you don't just clear your name. You bury his." Zeke looked up. "You'd risk sending your people to Dry Hollow?" Clara's answer came with no hesitation. "We've been bleeding under his shadow for too long." They began to plan. Zeke wrote to the only man he knew who might still have a spine left, Edward Lyle, an aging journalist from Santa Fe, who had once tried to expose corruption in land sales before being chased from his desk by rail company thugs. Clara sent scouts toward the town's edge. Others gathered statements from families who had lost children to the so-called orphan trains, Mexican, Apache, and black children rescued, only to be scrubbed clean of identity. Tomas helped too, quietly folding papers, translating between languages when needed. His face had grown sharper these past days, still a child but no longer hidden behind fear. He had Zeke's eyes, that haunted stillness, and Sophia's resolve, but courage alone wasn't armor. On the third night, just after the stars had begun to pulse over the ridge, Tomas disappeared. Zeke woke to the tent flap swinging in the wind. The cot was empty. At first he thought of water, of a walk to the fire pit, but when he stepped outside, the fire was cold. No tracks, no stirrings. Then he saw it. Near the edge of the encampment, a single piece of cloth tied to a bush, a handkerchief. It wasn't Tomas's. It was white linen, stained with blood at one corner. In the center, a crude symbol drawn in charcoal, a broken arrow inside a circle. Zeke's blood went cold. It was the brand used by McCullen's private agents, the same group that once tracked escaped slaves in the South, now rebranded as Rail Security. Zeke turned to shout for Clara, but stopped. Pinned to the post beside the fire pit was a message scrawled in English. "You took what wasn't yours. Now we return the debt." The rage that rose in Zeke wasn't hot. It was cold, colder than anything he'd felt since he'd left the war. He clenched his fists, then the edge of the post until a splinter pierced his palm and he didn't even flinch. By dawn, he was already riding. Clara tried to stop him. "You can't storm that town alone." Zeke met her gaze, eyes quiet and sharp. "I won't be alone. I've got the truth. I've got his blood. But they'll kill you before you reach the platform." Zeke shook his head. "Then they'll have to try, but I won't let another Holloway die in silence." He turned back only once before disappearing into the hills. And Clara, staring after him, knew something had changed. Zeke wasn't just a man running from the past anymore. He was riding straight into it, with everything left to lose. Dry Hollow had the air of something dressed in Sunday clothes trying to hide the smell of smoke. Banners stretched across storefronts. A makeshift stage stood erected at the center of the square. Men in tailored coats and boots, shined with spit and arrogancia, barked orders as workers placed rail company flags across the new depot facade. Somewhere beneath the fanfare, something rotten waited. Zeke entered the town through the freight path, quiet, dustless, riding a borrowed horse under the rising sun. No one recognized him at first. His face had changed, older, more carved by weather and grief than the posters made him seem. He kept the brim of his hat low, his coat loose to cover the rifle strapped under his saddle blanket, tucked inside his vest. Sophia's letter, Jacob's diary, Tomas's birth certificate, and a stack of affidavits signed by families who had lost everything to the senator's schemes. He walked straight into the Armazem by the rail yard. That was where the boy had been taken, Clara's scouts had said. Not the sheriff's office, not the church. A storage facility owned by the company. Unregulated, undocumented. He slid around the back entrance, found the side door cracked open. Inside, dust hung in shafts of pale light, filtering through the high windows. Crates marked with company codes lined the walls, grain, textiles, mining gear, and then he heard it. A cough, small, weak, familiar. He followed the sound past stacked tarpaulins, past boxes of rail spikes, until he reached a corner partitioned by canvas. Tomas sat on the floor, hands bound, mouth gagged. His left eye was bruised, but he was alive. Zeke stepped forward slowly, not wanting to startle him. "Easy, boy," he whispered, removing the gag first, then cutting the cords. Tomas gripped his arms the moment he was free and pressed his face into Zeke's chest. "I knew you'd come," he said. But before Zeke could answer, a voice behind them interrupted. "You're a damn fool, Holloway." Zeke turned. In the shadows stood Hoyt McCullen, no longer in his Senate garb, but still polished like a snake shedding one skin for another. A revolver hung at his side, not drawn. Behind him, 2 guards stood silently, watching. "Did you really think this would stay buried?" McCullen said, stepping closer. Sophia didn't understand her place. She thought her blood could mix with mine and mean something. Zeke's eyes narrowed. "You," he said. "You're his father." McCullen's smile was crooked. "You think the world would have allowed that? A bastard child born of a senator and a laundress?" He was a threat before he took his first breath. Zeke clenched his fists. "You killed her." McCullen shrugged. "I arranged an unfortunate accident, one Sophia would have deserved if she hadn't run." Tomas stepped behind Zeke now, his hand clutching his uncle's coat tightly. Zeke could feel him shaking, but not from fear, from fury. "You should have stayed buried with your brother," McCullen said coldly. "You never belonged in this world either, always pretending dignity was something a Holloway could afford." Zeke's voice was steady now. "I'm not here to pretend, I'm here to testify." With one hand, he pulled the letter from Sophia and held it out. Signed, named, dated. She kept everything. McCullen didn't flinch. "You think a crowd cares for paper?" Zeke stepped forward. "They'll care when I read it in front of 100 ears, when I show them the certificate, the transfers, the letters. You didn't just kill a woman, Hoyt. You tried to erase a bloodline." For a moment, the room fell silent except for the wind whispering through the high windows. Then McCullen laughed. A short, hollow sound. "You won't make it to the stage." Zeke looked at the boy behind him, then back at the man in front. "Then you'll have to kill me here," he said, "because I'm walking out with him, and I'm walking into the light." The guards hesitated. McCullen's face twitched. Zeke saw it, the flicker of doubt. The fear not of bullets but of being known, of being named. And in that instant, Zeke realized something important. Men like McCullen didn't fear death, they feared exposure. He stepped backward, keeping his eyes locked, and guided Tomas toward the door. No one moved to stop them. Outside, the town began to stir louder. People gathered near the square. A brass band tuned their horns, flags fluttered, and somewhere amid the crowd, Clara waited. Dry Hollow hadn't seen this many clean boots in years. Flags hung from the rail station's beams, red, white, blue cloth flapping in the wind like a promise too often broken. The newly built platform shimmered in the morning heat, lined with chairs for dignitaries, a raised podium, and a brass band playing loud enough to distract from the tension gathering beneath it all. The whole town seemed dressed for church, but Zeke knew this wasn't a celebration, it was a performance, and he had come to interrupt it. Zeke stood at the edge of the crowd, Tomas beside him, both wrapped in plain coats dusty from the road. No one recognized them yet. The senator was already at the podium, flanked by railroad men and deputies, speaking to the townsfolk with the smooth, confident rhythm of someone used to owning the room. His words were warm, familiar. Growth, progress, order. But they rang false, especially to a boy who had watched his mother die for refusing to sell land, and to a man who had spent a lifetime learning what men like Hoyt McCullen meant by order. Tomas clutched Zeke's sleeve, but not out of fear. There was a strength in his silence now, a shared understanding between them. This was no longer just about survival. This was about being seen, heard. Zeke stepped forward, pushing gently through the crowd. Some folks turned. A few gasped. More followed as he mounted the stage stairs, cutting through the political theater with slow, deliberate steps. McCullen faltered mid-sentence. His eyes narrowed. The man hadn't prepared for this moment. Not here. Not like this. Zeke didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "My name is Ezekiel Holloway," he said, facing the crowd, but feeling the weight of McCullen's glare behind him. "I rode through this town years ago when it was little more than dust and rumor. I returned today with a name that was almost buried, and with proof that some men would rather kill the truth than face it." He reached into the satchel and lifted out a yellowed letter. This was written by Sofia Delgado, 6 months before she was murdered. Not by thieves, not by accident, but by the very people paid to keep peace in this town. He handed the letter to a man from the Santa Fe Press, then pulled out the birth certificate. "This document proves that Tomas Rafael Delgado is the son of Jacob Holloway, my brother, a Union soldier, a man of faith, a man betrayed by the country he fought for." Gasps swept through the square. Zeke turned toward McCullen. "You knew Sophia. You used her. Then you tried to erase her. And when you found out the boy lived, you hunted him too, but he's here, he survived." Tomas stepped forward. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. His presence alone was defiance enough. McCullen finally spoke, his voice cold and measured. "This man is a fugitive. That child was taken from his guardians. None of what he says can be trusted." Zeke didn't flinch. "Then let the people decide," he said. "Let them read the letters. Let them see the records. You tried to erase a boy to protect your name." The air grew still. Even the band had stopped. Clara appeared near the edge of the platform, rifle at her side, eyes locked on the senator's men. Deputies whispered to one another, unsure now who gave orders in this town. Then, a shot rang out. It came from the far side of the square. Zeke instinctively shoved Tomas to the ground and turned, searching for the shooter. Before he could act, a second crack snapped through the air. Sharper, closer. The would-be assassin dropped behind a crate, wounded in the shoulder. Clara stood just beside the stage, her rifle raised, eyes steady, her message clear. McCullen stood frozen. Zeke helped Tomas up, keeping one arm around him, turning again to the crowd. "They've tried bullets, bribes." Silence, but the truth is louder than all of them. A murmur swept through the audience. Several stepped forward to examine the documents passed around by Clara's scouts. One of the journalists asked to photograph Zeke and Tomas together. Others began scribbling notes, not about rail lines or expansion, but about corruption and bloodlines long denied. McCullen said nothing. His jaw was tight, his posture rigid, but his control had slipped. His legacy, now exposed, hung in the air like smoke from a fire too long concealed. Zeke didn't smile. There was no victory in this, just the weight of a promise, finally spoken out loud. The crowd had begun to disperse by the time Zeke stepped down from the platform. The sun had shifted, throwing long shadows over the town square, where just hours before, hollow words of progress had echoed unchecked. Now the air felt thinner, stripped of illusion. A few townsfolk lingered, some murmuring disbelief, others staring at Tomas as if seeing him for the first time. No one clapped, no one cheered. But that silence held more power than applause. It meant they had heard. Zeke's legs ached as he led Tomas through the crowd. The adrenaline had faded, leaving only weight. In his arms, in his back, in his conscience. A deputy approached with hesitant steps, removing his hat as he came closer. "You got people in Santa Fe coming," the man said. "Federal. Papers from the capital. McCullen's finished." He paused. "You should get that boy somewhere safe." Zeke nodded, but said nothing. Safety was a word that had never fit easily in his mouth. Clara was waiting at the edge of town. She said little, but the way she placed a hand on Zeke's shoulder said enough. Behind her, several Lakota riders kept watch over the road, eyes sharp, rifles visible. They wouldn't be needed now, but Zeke knew what it meant for them to be there. She hadn't brought them to start a war. She had brought them to make sure one didn't happen again. They camped just beyond the ridge that night, under a sky thick with stars and the smell of rain in the distance. Zeke sat by the fire, the boy curled in a blanket beside him, fast asleep. The papers were folded neatly in Zeke's lap, their ink dry but still pulsing with memory. He turned over one of the letters, running his fingers across Sophia's handwriting. There was a tenderness to it even in her final words, as if she believed someone might one day be gentle with the truth. Clara joined him by the fire, her expression softer now, the hardness around her eyes loosened by something like understanding. "You did what he couldn't," she said. Zeke looked up. "Your brother," she clarified. "He died too far from home. You brought his son back to it." Zeke shook his head slowly. "I brought him into a fire." "No," she replied, voice even. "You brought him through it." He didn't answer. The flames flickered, painting the lines of his face with golden shadow. "I've been asked to stay," he said after a moment. "The government wants someone to mediate land disputes between the railroad and tribal territories. They think putting a Holloway in the middle will buy them some peace." Clara raised an eyebrow. "And?" Zeke chuckled, but there was no joy in it. "I said no. Because you don't trust them. Because promises aren't kept from behind desks," he said. "And because my hands are better used for building than bargaining." She nodded once, slowly. "You know, there's land near the mission," she said. Abandoned, fertile. It used to belong to Sophia's family." Zeke turned to her. "You think they'd let us have it? I think no one's come back to claim it, because no one knew it was still sacred." He looked toward the sleeping boy, chest rising and falling in slow, steady rhythm. "Then maybe it's time to plant something again," he said. The next morning they returned to Santa Fe, not to flee, but to witness. The headlines had already spread. Senator exposed in land scandal, child survives secret bloodline. McCullen had been detained, stripped of title, and escorted from his rail-funded estate under federal order. He didn't speak to the press. He didn't raise his voice. His silence was its own confession. Tomas was granted legal custody under Zeke's guardianship. The courts didn't fight it. They didn't dare. For once, the law bent toward justice, not because it wanted to, but because too many eyes were now watching. Zeke stood in front of the courthouse steps, holding the boy's hand, surrounded by press and questions and blinking shutters. He gave no statement, just one look into the lens of a camera before turning to walk away. It wasn't his name the people needed to remember. It was the one the world had tried to erase. The land sat quiet now, not because it had forgotten, but because it had survived. A few miles east of the old mission, where the earth sloped gently toward the hills and the air smelled faintly of mesquite, Zeke and Tomas stood beneath the shade of a weathered cottonwood tree. The soil had been cleared, turned, and planted in rows. Beans, corn, squash, the three sisters, as the native farmers called them. Between the rows, children ran barefoot, laughter echoing like bells across the dry wind. The school had started small, a tent, then a shed. Then, with the help of Clara's people and a few former railroad workers tired of silence, it became something sturdy. Bricks, beams, a roof that didn't leak. They called it the Holloway Mission School, not for pride, but because names matter, and some deserve to be spoken aloud after too long buried. Zeke taught reading and writing. Clara came monthly to teach Lakota language and stories. Others brought tools, seeds, books. No one asked where the children came from. Many had no papers, some had no names. But here they were not just mouths to feed. They were stories waiting to be written, stories no railroad could pave over. That morning, Tomas sat beneath the tree, notebook in hand. He scribbled slowly, erasing, correcting, writing again. Zeke watched from the porch, arms crossed, his once black coat now faded from sun and soil. His rifle hadn't been touched in weeks. His Bible rested on the windowsill, still marked at the page his mother used to read aloud. When Tomas finally looked up, his face was serious. "Can I read it to you?" he asked. Zeke nodded and sat beside him on the roots of the tree. Tomas cleared his throat. "My name is Tomas Rafael Delgado Holloway. My mother's name was Sophia. My father's name was Jacob. They were both taken, but someone came back for me. He didn't just give me a name, he gave me a place. And he showed me that the north isn't a direction, it's a promise, and sometimes promises grow from broken ground. Zeke didn't speak for a long moment. His throat tightened in that way it sometimes did when the past got too close, but he placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder and nodded. You've got his heart, he said. Your father. And hers? Tomas asked. Zeke smiled. Both, and your own too, stronger than either of us ever had. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the valley gold, Zeke walked alone to the edge of the field. He carried with him a small wooden box. Nothing fancy, just sanded smooth. Inside lay Jacob's diary, Sophia's final letter, and the bullet casing he'd unearthed near her grave. He dug a hole beneath the cottonwood and laid the box gently into the earth. No ceremony, no speech, just one phrase, spoken softly to the wind. Promise kept. As he rose, Tomas called out to him from the porch. Supper was ready. Zeke turned back, the twilight on his face, and walked home. Not to hide, not to flee, but to build something that no one else could ever erase again.